Hello everybody, my name is Mathis and welcome back to your next dose of nostalgia. Mama Mathis has come on through and sent me some more of my collection, and this box is a really interesting mix of older games and some newer stuff in the indie scene, some physical versions of the games that I have from an old brand deal I used to do way back in the day. This is gonna be a fun one, it should be exciting. Let's check out what my mom sent me. First game, this is a huge collector's edition of one of the most prevalent series in RPGs that ever existed and really kind of created the landscape or helped create the landscape of what RPGs would become in the 90s, early 2000s and further. This one is Ultima 9 Ascension Dragon Edition. I don't know if this is actually complete in box. It has a good chunk of the stuff in it, like a big map, and it's enormous, gorgeous box to display. But the big thing about Ultima is that Ultima, especially the early ones, were some of the most popular RPGs of their time and were groundbreaking in how open they were, how many things you could do, how living the world was, especially back in Ultima 1, 2, 3, and 4. Those early days. This is obviously well before Ultima Online. However, Ultima 9 is one of the final ones. It might even be the final main Ultima game. If memory serves correctly, I could be wrong, but as it got further and further along, the Ultima games were less and less prevalent in the gaming world, and Ultima 9 was one of the very last ones. As you see during the gameplay, it's got that old school kind of polygonal 3D model, a lot of cool ingenuity involved in the way the world looks, but beyond that, I have not played the later Ultima games. I'm only familiar with the earlier ones. All right, this next one, we're gonna kind of speed through a bunch of clamshell games, which are just less exciting to look at and more modern in the way they work. The first one is actually Final Fantasy VIII. I have two versions of Final Fantasy VIII, the big box version, which I have not gotten yet, and then the clamshell version, which was a secondary version EA made and put out in the public sphere. Kind of like their EA Classics or just another way to attain the game, and they were trying to make a little bit more money out of it. Just clamshell game, very basic. Age of Conan, which is an MMO here. Age of Conan was popping into the world when MMOs were at their peak and really tried to claw itself its own little niche in terms of players, and hung around longer than I expected it to. But unfortunately for Conan, it did not last long enough for the game to make any notable impact on the genre. Next is actually Witcher 2, one of my favorite RPGs of all time. This game I played through multiple times. It has 32 potential endings, including one where you and the final boss don't even fight. You sit down, you have a drink, you talk it out, and you go your separate ways. Very rarely did a game ever let you do that, and when I kind of hit that ending and I had that option, it blew me away. I really loved it. And then final was a pickup I got at Target when it was at clearance for $5. This game was kind of big for a couple months when it came out. Very of its time, the mid 2010s, when physics platformers were lol hilarious and every YouTuber was playing them, including myself, and that is I Am Bread. It's what it is. You're a piece of bread trying to get toasted, and it's a physics hilarious, like level exploratory game. Not much more to say other than that. Many years back, when Mathis Games was probably only a few years old, I actually ended up partnering with a company called IndieBox. I actually have no idea if they exist anymore. They probably do under different ways. We've got in this pile Hue, which is a platformer where you're spreading color all around and trying to bring color back to the world. We've got Nefarious, where instead of playing a hero in a puzzle platformer, you're playing the villain. This is one of my favorite box designs, simply because it's gorgeous. The art in the purple, green, red aesthetic really pops. Classic, another classic called Rive. If this is an indie game that dates back way to like 2011, somewhere around there. Sort of an action 360-degree shooter / platformer that was really fun and still is. If you haven't checked it out, Rive is definitely fun. Then there's Jotun, which was a gorgeous isometric top-down action RPG-esque game that I think kind of slipped under a lot of people's radars when it came out, because there are some other games around that time that were similar and pulling a lot of the attention, but Jotun was really good. And then I have Galaxy, which is a side-scrolling shoot-'em-up that has a really cool figure on the inside, very Gundam-esque. Banner Saga in the box. It says 7 of 12 on the side. I don't know what that means. I think for the year of 2017. And each one, I probably should have pointed out, is all limited edition. So this is number, for me, out of 3,500, 374. But these are gonna look real good on the shelf. Next up, some more Blizzard games. Another WoW expansion, and perhaps my favorite expansion of all time for World of Warcraft, Wrath of the Lich King. This is the copy I bought on launch night. This is the copy I opened and installed that night with my friend Dave. We played till like 3 or 4 in the morning. And this was the game that was one of the games I played the most during some of the darkest times of my life. This game is simultaneously means a lot to me and reminds me of a period of time that I won't forget. There's just a lot of complicated emotions tied into this one. Next, this was a fun one to find. I got this one on eBay. I had been looking for a big box version of it for a little while. They're not super hard to find, but surprisingly so. The original Diablo with the giant gatefold box. I played the OG Diablo as a kid when I was growing up. Same thing with Diablo 2, but much like a lot of the games back then, they were my friend's games that he burned on a CD for me. I didn't have the big box version of any of the games I was playing on PC, just burned copies because we couldn't afford them. And I was really grateful to have a friend that would do that for me. He made sure I always had the most up-to-date games back before burning CDs and everything was mega taboo and when younger Mathis didn't really know any better. Along with Diablo, I've got the big box version of Diablo 2 with the little manual inside. This is a great, another gatefold box that's just beautiful scene of the second stage on the inside. Really shows off all the classes. You got this in your hands at any store and your mind went wild with how cool this game was gonna be, how good it looked, the action, the loot. Diablo 2 is a classic for a reason. And then when you finally beat Diablo 2, you would jump into Diablo 2 expansion pack, Lord of Destruction, which was more Diablo 2, more classes, more loot, more levels, another boss. This is the expansion that brought the Druid and the Assassin, classics nowadays. And then to wrap up the whole Blizzard section of this box, the only collector's edition of any expansion for WoW I ever bought was Cataclysm. It's cool if you own all of them because they stuck with the same kind of theming and all the boxes look just a little different from each other, but you can tell they're all, they all have that kind of matte finish and they look like old books or tomes. I love the WoW collector's editions, the collector's editions of many of their games. I have a few still that are on their way that I bought a long time ago. The 20th anniversary edition of WoW is coming at some point. It's a huge white box. Either way, these are really cool because they come with art books and mouse pads and maps and in-game rewards back from when I played WoW. This is all used and opened, so it's worth nothing now, but it is going to look gorgeous up there. Now, I remember this game coming out. This is Clive Barker's Undying. However, I had never played it, but I saw this at Half Price Books for $5, and it's one of those I remember this game coming out, but I didn't know how it played. It's a first-person shooter, but I know very little about this game other than I think it's hell is coming to Earth or something along those lines. Again, Clive Barker games are very hit and miss. None of them are amazing, but the ones that are okay have a very interesting premise that really helps bring you through the story. And I might be remembering wrong, but that's all I remember about Undying, is that there was a cool story, but the gameplay was not great. Maybe I'm wrong, and maybe it was an amazing game, but this is one of those games that I don't remember doing all that well. Even on the cover of this one though, there's a rating from GamePro that says, Undying is the most complete and balanced single-player first-person shooter since Half-Life. An amazing claim for a game that did not do well. In that same vein of cheap games that I ended up picking up somewhere along the line, whenever I see these, I have to get them. This is Atlantis Quest, but it's a boxed puzzle game, like a full-in box puzzle game. Because nowadays, they are not going to spend the money to buy up some shelf space at any store or produce boxes with stuff in them. But at some point, there was no digital distribution back in the day, and the only way you could do it is by making these boxes. So whenever I see this strange puzzle game, this is a match 3 game, I have to pick it up simply because it's such a curiosity to me that, there was a time where people would grab these and be like, ooh, a match 3 game. Let me spend $20 and buy it and install it instead of playing the countless free ones you can now. All right, I love Vampire the Masquerade, but Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines is the most well-known of the vampire games out there in terms of World of Darkness. It's a cult classic, it's an amazing RPG, but before that came around, they had another RPG it was a turn-based RPG in the early 3D era trying to use tabletop rules, and that was Vampire the Masquerade Redemption. And the only thing people really speak highly of in this game is the story, because the gameplay hasn't really carried over all that well. I tried to do a let's play of it, and the game is just extremely clunky, extremely punishing, and not all that great, just to be honest. The story is great because it starts in the Middle Ages, and eventually you find your way into the modern times, and how that happens if you want to play it, because the Vampire Masquerade games are so rare. I won't spoil, but it's a really neat twist that not any other game had really done back then, and Vampire the Masquerade was the perfect world to do it in. What's unique about the box, other than it's gorgeous, and I was lucky that the owner had it in perfect condition, and it has a really cool gatefold on the inside, is that its anti-piracy, anti-theft was physical. This is not on the day where you had like anti-pirating software or, confirmation keys. This had it in one way. The box could only be opened like a cereal box. There was a pull tab here, and you'd rip it open in order to get into the box. Now, granted, any smart person might be able to get in from the bottom, but they did everything they can, because it doesn't open up like a normal game box for other PC games. You'd actually have to rip it open as well. It's glued shut in the bottom. This was their way of making sure that somebody didn't grab it, pirate it, and then return the game. If it was opened, no returns. I found kind of an interesting little piece of trivia, I guess. Speaking of Final Fantasy VIII, the actual box version of Final Fantasy VIII was in here. I liked 8. I remember liking it. I didn't play it more than once, but I remember enjoying it. But this box is gorgeous. It's got a hollow foil kind of feel all the way around it. Nice picture of Squall back there. For all those who want to thirst after Squall, he's such a sexy man, just like me. It does not have a gatefold. The box is a lot simpler than how they did with Final Fantasy VII, but the fact that it's shiny is kind of cool. This one I actually did a video on back in, oh God, Dean can correct me. I think this was a 2017 Judge Mathis, Beyond Good and Evil. An amazing game. God knows if we'll see a sequel. We've had an announced sequel for a long time, but there's been so much issues at Ubisoft. I have no confidence that we'll see a sequel. But if you want to play a game that was very ahead of its time and combined kind of this almost Batman Arkham-like combat mixed with these semi-open world levels of exploration and a little Pokemon Snap mixed in, Beyond Good and Evil is such a unique experience and still holds up today really, really well. Seriously, this is a classic for a reason. Please play Beyond Good and Evil if you never have. Now, I know I've got a giant SNES collection coming my way, but I've also got a few console games for other consoles. This one's unopened. I got it again, another clearance sale. I think it was at Target. But Yakuza 6 Song of Life, like Steelbook version, I think it is. The Essence of Art Edition. Yakuza is one of those games I have full-on plans on playing through at some point, but it's just, I have such a big backlog. But Yakuza, if you know what it is, you know what it is. I'm not going to go over it right now. It is an amazing, amazing open world action adventure game. All right, another one I've already done a video on, and actually a very recent video, and that's Stubbs the Zombie in Rebel Without a Pulse. This is goddamn near impossible to find physical on PC. I had such a pain in the ass of a time finding an in-box PC copy that wasn't just the jewel case or the CD. When I finally found it, I got it as fast as I could. It's just really nice to have. And this was, again, when I said it during the video, but this was the game that really made Judge Mathis kind of disappear for a while because of how hard it was for me to find a playable copy until the fates aligned and they ended up remastering it for us. Really fun game. Go watch my video on it if you want to know my full thoughts. And then another one I did a few years ago, Populous the Beginning, one of the greatest, if not the greatest, God games that ever existed. I think Populous now, especially Populous the Beginning, is really only fun when you put the cheat codes in because of how grindy and slow and kind of repetitive and boring it gets when a lot of the fun aspects of this game come from the god powers. But it's worth playing vanilla at least once and then just unloading your godly powers all over the face of your enemies. This is a game I have played, but played on the original Xbox when it came out and have not done a video on, and that's The Longest Journey. This is a point-and-click adventure, but 3D. It's a modern adventure game with some action bits and a little bit of combat, but really it's all about the adventure and wandering through the story. And it's kind of got this, you almost want to call it modern Alice in Wonderland story, where the main character exists in our real world, and then is pulled into this other fantasy world where she's very important, and is kind of trying to figure out what's going on between them. It's a trilogy, and the most recent game I remember, at least back when it came out, had been being clamored for by the fans for a long time until they eventually did make it. Reminds me a little of Shenmue, except if Shenmue 3 wasn't terrible. This is a hard one to really kind of put into perspective without doing a full video on it. But this is Giants Citizens Kabuto. It's kind of RPS meets action game meets RPG, where you're kind of managing a bunch of different units and civilizations at the same time, while also going out and fighting. There's 3 different groups of people you can play as, and each one plays wildly differently. This is another one of those games that built up a massive cult following after it launched and was generally well received, but I don't know if it was the name or the way it looked, but the general public kind of overlooked it. It's the reason I really want to cover it in full in the near future. These last 2 are kind of self-explanatory if you're a gamer at all. Deus Ex, groundbreaking game. Its sequels, both modern and the ones from around this time, are good in varying ways, but the classic Deus Ex is hard to beat. One of the few games back in that era that really let you tackle levels any way you wanted, either action or stealth or hacking things or talking to people. It was an amazing playground for people who enjoyed those simulation-like games where their decisions and the way they wanted to do it were allowed within the game's rules. There was not this narrow way one must progress through a level. They could build themselves and make themselves however they wanted, and the game would allow them a route to victory no matter their choices. That makes Deus Ex a classic that can't be forgotten, and one I'll definitely do a video on eventually. And the final one in this box comes from a fan who sent it to me. I don't remember the reasons he did. I do remember talking to him though, and that's Spore Galactic Edition. Spore, you love it or hate it, did a lot. It hyped the gaming world beyond compare, not that we haven't seen that before, but for its faults, much like Cyberpunk or any other games along those veins, what it was trying to do within its genre, it still did really well, even if it didn't reach all those amazing promises it tried to put forward to those when it was marketing itself in its previews. And for that reason, I still like Spore. I think Spore is still a really fun game to play today. It was fun to play back then, and even the Galactic Edition is cool. It's got this embezzled, that's all like textured all the way around. This actually leads into the book. When you take it out, the case gets empty, though it's a hard plastic, and you've got these books, art, pull-in things, How to Build a Better Being by National Geographic, and this really neat unfoldable case for the game. Even if Spore wasn't what we wanted it to be, there's no denying that Spore was still good for what it was. Hindsight is 20/20 and all that. And that's it for the nostalgia. More things to add to the collection, which I'm gonna go do right now. I wanna thank you guys so much for watching and enjoying these nostalgia trips with me, even if, not a ton of people are. This has just been so fun for me to do and reminds me of the videos I wanna still do and makes me think of other games I'd love to add to this collection. Let me know what your favorite game in this box was, if you had one, or if there's one you're just waiting to see if I have. Let me know what it is, and you'll see in the next few boxes whether I have it or not. We're about halfway there now with my collection. Quite a few more to come still, but it'll be fun when they're here. Thanks so much for watching, everybody, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.